a misplaced kick, a forbidden entry, and a discovery that would shatter a young boy's world and unearth a secret buried in the heart of Raven's Hollow. What lurked behind the bolted doors of his father's barn was a nightmare he could never have imagined. Will he find the courage to expose the darkness? Don't forget to smash that subscribe button and let us know in the comments what you would have done. The late afternoon sun beat down on Raven's Hollow, a small, isolated homestead nestled deep in the Appalachian foothills of West Virginia. 10-year-old Liam Gallagher wiped a bead of sweat from his brow, his gaze fixed on the worn leather soccer ball at his feet. The vast, untamed forest pressed in on all sides of their small clearing, its ancient trees like silent, watchful sentinels. His only companions were the cicada's relentless drone and the distant caw of a crow. Liam wasn't supposed to be playing so close to the house, not with his father, Marcus, due back any minute from his trip into town for supplies. But the lure of a few precious moments of practice, a brief escape from the oppressive silence that usually blanketed their farm, was too strong. He imagined a roaring crowd, the thrill of a championship game, anything but the stark reality of his lonely existence. 37, he muttered, his breath catching as he lined up another shot against the peeling paint of their old two-story farmhouse. The rhythmic thwack of the ball was a comforting, familiar sound in the otherwise quiet expanse. His mother, Eleanor, had called out earlier, her voice thin and strained as it carried from the kitchen window. "Liam, honey, be careful with that ball. Your father won't be pleased if you break something." He'd nodded, a quick, dismissive gesture. "Just a few more, Mom." Soccer was his solace. It was the one thing that made him feel normal, a connection to a world beyond the whispering pines and the watchful eyes of the mountains. He was aiming for 50 consecutive kicks, a personal record. Number 48. He drew back his leg, pouring all his frustration, all his pent-up energy into the strike. The moment his boot connected, he knew. A sickening lurch in his stomach told him he'd misjudged the angle, the power. The ball soared, not towards the weathered siding of the house, but in a high, cruel arc towards the dilapidated red barn that stood at the edge of their property, shrouded in an almost perpetual gloom. Time seemed to stretch, to warp. Liam watched, frozen, as the ball descended, a dark speck against the bruised purple of the evening sky. It crashed through one of the barn's grimy, cobweb-laced windows with a sharp, splintering crack that echoed through the hollow like a gunshot. Shards of glass, glinting like malevolent eyes, rained down onto the overgrown grass below. Liam's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. The barn, of all places. His father, Marcus, had laid down the law with an iron fist. The barn was forbidden territory. Full of rusted equipment, unstable beams, and chemicals that'll burn your skin off, he'd growled on more than one occasion, his eyes glinting with a severity that brooked no argument. "You stay clear, you hear me? It's not a playground." The warnings had intensified since the farm had fallen on even harder times, after Marcus had lost their main logging contract the previous year. The barn, once a hub of activity, now stood silent, a monument to their dwindling fortunes, its secrets locked away. "Stupid, stupid, stupid," Liam hissed, his voice a choked whisper. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at his throat. His father would be apoplectic about the broken window. But leaving the ball, that wasn't an option. It was a gift from his grandfather, one of the few decent things he owned. Marcus, always tight-fisted, certainly wouldn't replace it, not now, with money scarcer than hen's teeth. His eyes darted towards the winding dirt track that served as their driveway. Relief, potent and immediate, flooded through him. Marcus's battered Ford pickup, its fenders caked with the red mud of the region, was still absent. He'd grumbled about needing to pick up a special order of feed from Miller's General Store, a good 40-minute drive away. That bought Liam time. Maybe an hour, if he was lucky. He took a tentative step towards the looming structure. The barn seemed to swell in size as he approached, its faded red paint peeling like sunburnt skin, revealing the dark, weathered wood beneath. A shiver traced its way down his spine, unrelated to the cooling evening air. The place always felt wrong. Even from a distance, it exuded an aura of decay and forgotten things. As he drew closer, his sneakers crunching on the gravelly path, he noticed something peculiar. The heavy, rust-pitted padlock that always secured the massive double doors hung open, dangling loosely from the hasp. His breath hitched, Had Marcus forgotten to lock it on his way out? Or perhaps he'd been in there earlier and hadn't bothered. It was uncharacteristic. Marcus was meticulous about security, almost paranoid. A fierce internal battle raged within him. One voice, the voice of ingrained obedience and fear, screamed at him to turn back, to confess to his mother about the window and face the inevitable storm of his father's wrath. But another voice, a sly, insidious whisper of curiosity, a desperate need to retrieve his prized possession, urged him forward. The broken window was already a death sentence. What more could going inside add? He glanced back at the house. The kitchen window was dark. His mother was likely in the back, tending her small vegetable garden. He was alone. Taking a deep, shaky breath that did little to calm the frantic thumping in his chest, Liam reached out a trembling hand and pushed against the heavy, groaning wooden door. The sound of creaking hinges ripped through the stillness, loud enough, he feared, to wake the dead. The door swung inward, a yawning black maw opening into the shadowy depths of the forbidden barn. The air that billowed out was thick, cloying. It smelled of old hay, damp earth, something acrid like rust, and an underlying, unidentifiable fetor that made his stomach clench. It was cooler inside, a damp, tomb-like chill that seeped into his bones despite the lingering summer heat. Shafts of dusty sunlight pierced the gloom through cracks in the warped plank walls and the newly shattered window, illuminating swirling motes of dust like tiny, spectral dancers. His eyes struggled to adjust to the dimness. Vague shapes began to resolve themselves. Along one wall, shrouded in ghostly tarpaulins, sat hulking pieces of forgotten farm machinery. Towers of hay bales, stacked haphazardly, loomed like ancient, crumbling monoliths along another. The silence in here was different from the silence outside. It was heavier, more oppressive, as if the barn itself was holding its breath. Then he saw it, his soccer ball. It lay nestled near a haphazard pile of hay and discarded feed sacks in the center of the vast space, a familiar, comforting shape in the eerie dimness. A wave of relief, so intense it almost buckled his knees, washed over him. Grab it and go, quick, before his luck ran out, before his father. He took a step forward, his sneakers silent on the dirt-packed floor. Another. His gaze was fixed on the ball. He was almost there. He reached out, his fingers brushing the worn leather, when a small sound made him freeze. A sigh. A soft, almost inaudible exhalation, like someone stirring in their sleep. It hadn't come from him. His blood ran cold. He wasn't alone. Slowly, agonizingly, Liam lifted his head, his eyes scanning the shadowed recesses beyond the hay bales. And then he saw it. A makeshift bed, crudely constructed from more hay, with a filthy, tattered blanket draped over it. And beneath the blanket, a small, still form. The air in the barn grew thick, suffocating. Liam's breath hitched, caught somewhere between his lungs and his throat. Every nerve ending screamed at him to flee, to burst out of the shadowy confines and back into the fading sunlight. But his feet were rooted to the damp earth floor, his eyes transfixed by the small, still form huddled on the makeshift bed of hay. It was a person, a child. He could make out the faint outline of a small body beneath the grimy, threadbare blanket. A tangle of matted hair, the color of straw, peeked out from one end. His soccer ball, the object of his illicit quest, sat innocently on the straw-covered ground near what he presumed were the figure's feet, now utterly forgotten. The silence stretched, taut and vibrating, broken only by the frantic thumping of his own heart and the drip, drip, drip of water from a leaky spot in the corrugated tin roof. He strained his ears, listening for another sigh, another movement. Nothing. Was she asleep? Or something worse? The thought sent a fresh wave of icy dread through him. He had to know. Taking a step, then another, each one a monumental effort of will, Liam crept closer. The shadows clung to the corners of the barn like living things, and the musty odor of decay seemed to intensify. As he neared the hay bale bed, partially concealed behind a teetering stack of empty feed bags, the details sharpened. A girl. Definitely a girl. She couldn't have been much older than 6, maybe 7. Her face, turned towards him, was smudged with dirt, pale and gaunt beneath the grime. Her blonde hair, lank and lifeless, was matted around her small head. She wore a pink dress, or what had once been pink. Now it was faded, stained, and ripped in several places, far too small for her thin frame. One tiny bare foot, caked with mud, protruded from beneath the blanket. Beside the makeshift bed, a plastic bucket served as a grim nightstand. On it sat a half-empty bottle of murky water and the dried, curled-up remains of what looked like a sandwich crust. The sight of it, the stark poverty and neglect, twisted something deep inside Liam. This wasn't just someone hiding out. This was different. This was wrong. His gaze flickered around the immediate area. No sign of anyone else. But the oppressive atmosphere of the barn, the sense of being watched, persisted. He took one more hesitant step. The floorboard beneath his sneaker creaked, a sudden sharp crack in the oppressive silence. The girl's eyes flew open. They were wide, a startling pale blue in her dirt-streaked face, and they were filled with a raw, animalistic terror that struck Liam to the core. She didn't scream. She didn't move. She just stared at him, her small body tensing, coiling like a cornered animal preparing to bolt or fight. For a long, breathless moment, they simply stared at each other. Two children caught in a tableau of fear and disbelief. Liam's mind reeled, struggling to process the impossible reality before him. A girl, hidden in his father's forbidden barn. Why? Who was she? "Hi," Liam whispered, his voice barely a tremor in the heavy air. I'm Liam. I live in the house." He tried to smile, to offer some reassurance, but his face felt stiff, unnatural. "Who are you?" The girl didn't respond. Her eyes, wide and luminous with fear, darted from him to the barn door, then back again, as if calculating her chances of escape. She pulled her knees up to her chest, pressing herself further against the rough wall of hay bales behind her, making herself as small as possible. The tattered blanket was clutched tightly in her tiny fists. "I'm not going to hurt you," Liam said, taking a small, deliberate step back, trying to give her space to show he wasn't a threat. Are you lost? Why are you in our barn?" Her lips parted, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. He leaned forward, straining to hear if she would speak. And then, the sound. A low, distant rumble, growing steadily louder. The unmistakable chug and groan of his father's ancient Ford pickup, laboring up the steep incline of their dirt driveway. Marcus was back. Earlier than expected. Panic, white-hot and absolute, surged through Liam. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. The girl's eyes widened even further at the sound, if that was possible. A choked whimper escaped her lips, and she shrank back against the hay, pulling the thin blanket completely over her head, as if trying to disappear into the very fabric of the barn. Her reaction, more than anything he had seen so far, told Liam everything he needed to know. She wasn't just hiding in the barn. She was hiding from his father. She was terrified of Marcus. There was no time to think, no time for questions. Instinct took over. Abandoning his soccer ball, abandoning the mystery of the girl, Liam spun on his heel and bolted for the barn door. He wrenched it open, stumbled out into the rapidly fading daylight, and pulled it shut behind him with a resounding thud. In his haste, in his sheer, unadulterated terror, he completely forgot about the unlocked padlock dangling from the hasp. He sprinted several yards away from the barn, his lungs burning, before he forced himself to slow down, to adopt a more casual, nonchalant walk. He had to appear normal, unconcerned, despite the adrenaline thundering through his veins and the horrifying image of the girl's terrified eyes seared into his mind. Marcus's pickup truck crested the rise, dust billowing behind it like a malevolent storm cloud. It rumbled into the farmyard, gears grinding as it came to a halt near the woodshed. Liam considered making a dash for the house, for the flimsy sanctuary of his mother's presence, but he knew that would only draw suspicion. He had to stand his ground. He forced himself to breathe, to unclench his trembling hands. Marcus swung himself down from the cab, a tall, powerfully built man with shoulders like an ox, and hands calloused from years of hard labor. His face, perpetually sunburned and etched with lines of discontent, was set in its usual grim expression. His gaze swept the yard, and then, with unerring accuracy, it landed on Liam. And then it flicked to the barn, to the newly broken window, now glaringly obvious in the dusky light. Marcus's expression, already stern, contorted. His eyes, the same pale blue as the girl's but cold and hard as glacial ice, narrowed. He said nothing, but the silence was more menacing than any shout. He started towards Liam, his heavy work boots crunching on the gravel with slow, deliberate thuds. Each step seemed to make the ground tremble. Liam swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly as dry as the dust motes dancing in the barn's interior. He could feel the weight of the secret he now carried, a secret far heavier, far more dangerous than a broken window and a retrieved soccer ball, the girl in the barn. His father's approach, the two were connected, he knew it with a chilling certainty, and he was trapped, caught squarely in the middle. Marcus advanced, his shadow stretching long and distorted in the twilight, engulfing Liam. The air grew heavy, charged with an unspoken accusation. Liam's gaze was fixed on his father's boots, unable to meet the icy blue stare he knew was boring into him. "What in God's name do you think you're doing, boy?" Marcus's voice was a low growl, more dangerous for its restraint than any outburst. He stopped a few feet from Liam, his towering frame radiating an almost palpable aura of menace. His eyes flicked again to the broken window, then back to Liam, pinning him like an insect. "You know damn well you're not to go anywhere near that barn." Liam swallowed, the sound loud in the sudden stillness. I'm sorry, Dad," he stammered, forcing himself to look up, to meet that chilling gaze. His own voice sounded small, reedy. "My ball. It went through the window. Accidentally." He rushed the words out, hoping the confession would appease some of the impending wrath. "I didn't go inside to get it, I was just looking at the damage. A lit, a desperat, flimsy lit." But the truth, the horrifying truth of what he'd seen, was too monstrous to utter. Marcus's eyes narrowed further, suspicion glinting in their depths. He took another step, closing the distance until he loomed directly over Liam. Liam could smell the faint, acrid scent of sweat and motor oil that always clung to his father. "Just looking, huh?" He glanced towards the barn door, his gaze lingering on the unlocked padlock, a silent, damning piece of evidence. Liam's heart leaped into his throat. Had he noticed? A muscle twitches in Marcus's jaw. He turned back to Liam, his expression unreadable. For a long, tense moment he said nothing, simply stared. Liam felt like a rabbit caught in the glare of a predator's headlights. "I'll retrieve your ball later," Marcus said finally, his voice flat, "and you'll work off the cost of that window. Extra chores, for a week, starting with mucking out the chicken coop before breakfast tomorrow." He leaned down, bringing his face uncomfortably close to Liam's. The scent of stale coffee on his breath was overpowering. "Let me make myself perfectly clear, boy. You are never to go near that barn again. It's dangerous there. Unstable. You understand me?" "Yes, sir," Liam whispered, fighting the urge to shrink away. The intensity of his father's stare was suffocating. "Good." Marcus straightened up, his gaze still hard. "Now, get inside. Help your mother with supper. I've got things to unload." Liam didn't need to be told twice. He practically fled towards the house, the weight of his father's eyes burning into his back. Questions, terrifying and insistent, swirled in his mind. The girl. Who was she? Why was she there? Why was she so petrified of his father? But he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that these were questions he could never ask. Not now. Not ever. He burst through the back door into the relative warmth and light of the kitchen. Eleanor looked up from the stove, where she was stirring a pot of stew. Her face, usually pale and etched with worry, seemed even more strained than usual. She was a thin woman, her once bright auburn hair now streaked with premature gray, pulled back in a severe ponytail. Her features, which might have been pretty once, were sharpened by years of hardship, and Liam was beginning to realize fear. "Liam, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." Her voice was quiet, almost hesitant, as if she were afraid of the answer. "Nothin', Mom," he mumbled, avoiding her gaze. "Just, Dad's back. And I broke a window in the barn with my ball." Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes widening. "Oh, Liam, what did he say?" "Extra chores," he said, shrugging, trying to appear nonchalant. "He's going to get the ball later." Relief flickered across her face, quickly followed by a renewed anxiety. "Well, wash up for supper, and try to stay out of his way, all right?" The meal was an exercise in suffocating tension. Marcus ate in grim silence, shoveling food into his mouth with barely a pause. The only sounds were the clinking of cutlery against cheap ceramic plates and Marcus's occasional grunt of disapproval about the price of diesel or the incompetence of the cashier at Miller's. 30%. 30% increase on feed since last spring, he grumbled, stabbing at a piece of potato. Highway robbery, that's what it is. How's a man supposed to make an honest living when these corporations are squeezing us dry? Eleanor nodded sympathetically, her eyes downcast as she pushed food around her plate. Maybe things will improve next season, Marcus, she offered quietly, her voice barely audible. Marcus snorted, a harsh, derisive sound. Not likely, not with those vultures at the bank breathing down our necks about the mortgage every damn month. Liam ate mechanically, his mind a whirlwind. The image of the girl's terrified face, her matted hair, the desolate makeshift bed, it was burned into his memory. He kept replaying the moment her eyes flew open, the raw fear in them, and her reaction to the sound of his father's truck. He had to know. He had to ask someone. When Marcus pushed back from the table with a grunt, announcing he was going to check the generator, Liam seized the momentary reprieve. He leaned towards his mother, his voice a low, urgent whisper. "Mom?" She looked at him, her eyes wary. "Yes, dear?" "Mom, do I have a sister?" The effect was immediate and devastating. Eleanor's fork clattered from her hand, striking her plate with a sharp crack. The color drained from her face, leaving it a ghastly, chalky white. Her eyes, wide and suddenly filled with a terror that mirrored the girl's in the barn, darted towards the back door, as if expecting Marcus to reappear at any second. What kind of question is that, Liam?" she stammered, her voice unnaturally high-pitched. She reached for her water glass, her hand trembling so violently that water sloshed over the rim. Before Liam could press further, the back door creaked open and Marcus filled the doorway, his expression dark. "What the hell's going on in here? Sounded like you dropped the whole damn stove." His gaze swept between Liam's anxious face and Eleanor's stark terror. "What were you two whispering about?" "Nothing, Marcus," Eleanor said quickly, her voice tight with forced nonchalance. She fumbled with her napkin, her eyes avoiding his. "Just..." Liam was asking about his school project. "Weren't you, dear? About that history report?" Liam, caught off guard by her desperate attempt to deflect, could only nod mutely. The lie felt heavy, suffocating, in the already tense atmosphere. His mother knew something. Her reaction hadn't been mere surprise, it had been profound, visceral fear, the kind of fear that spoke of a terrible, hidden truth. The unseen wound in their family, the one that festered beneath the surface of their strained silences and forced smiles, was deeper and more horrifying than he could ever have imagined. And the girl in the barn was somehow at its very heart. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of oppressive silence and unspoken anxieties. Marcus settled into his worn armchair in the living room, the flickering light of the small television casting dancing shadows on his grim face as he nursed a bottle of cheap whiskey. Eleanor moved about the kitchen with a forced, brittle cheerfulness, the clatter of her washing dishes a counterpoint to the low murmur of the television. Liam retreated to his small bedroom upstairs, the image of the terrified girl in the barn replaying endlessly in his mind. He tried to focus on his homework, a dull passage about the Civil War, but the words swam before his eyes. His mother's reaction to his innocent question about a sister echoed in his thoughts. The stark terror in her eyes had been undeniable. She knew something terrible. He lay in bed hours later, staring at the cracked plaster of his ceiling, the moonlight filtering through his thin curtains casting eerie shapes on the walls. Sleep was an impossibility. Every creak of the old farmhouse, every rustle of leaves in the wind outside, sent a jolt of apprehension through him. Around 11, just as exhaustion was beginning to dull the sharp edges of his fear, he heard it. The distinct, heavy tread of his father's boots on the wooden stairs. Not heading up to bed, but down. He held his breath, listening. The back door creaked open, then shut with a soft click. A new, cold dread settled in Liam's stomach. Driven by a compulsion he couldn't name, a terrifying premonition, he slipped out of bed. The floorboards were cold beneath his bare feet. He crept to his window, which overlooked the backyard, and offered a clear, if somewhat obscured view of the path leading to the barn. The moon was nearly full, bathing the clearing in a ghostly, silvery light. The familiar landscape looked alien, menacing. And then he saw him, his father. Marcus was moving stealthily across the yard, a dark silhouette against the moon-bleached grass. He wasn't stumbling from the whiskey, his gait was purposeful, almost furtive. In one hand, he carried what looked like a plate, covered with a cloth. In the other, a bottle. Water, perhaps? Liam's heart pounded so loudly he was sure it would wake his mother in the adjoining room. He watched, transfixed, as Marcus reached the barn. The massive door creaked open just enough for him to slip inside, then closed again, swallowing him into the darkness. The girl. He was taking food to the girl. A torrent of horrifying realizations crashed over Liam. His father wasn't just hiding old equipment or dangerous chemicals. He was hiding a person, a child. The girl's fear, her emaciated state, his mother's terror, it all coalesced into a single monstrous truth. This wasn't a game of hide and seek. This wasn't some runaway kid his father had taken pity on. This was something far more sinister. He had to see. He had to know. Fear warred with a desperate, horrified curiosity. He counted to 60, each second an eternity, his mind racing. When he reached the end, a reckless resolve had taken root. He pulled on his jeans and a dark t-shirt, his fingers fumbling with the buttons in his haste. Slipping on his old sneakers without bothering to tie the laces, he tiptoed out of his room and down the creaking stairs, careful to avoid the third step from the bottom that always groaned in protest. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. He hugged the shadows along the side of the house, then darted across the moonlit patch of grass towards the barn, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. Crickets chirped their incessant song, and somewhere in the distant woods an owl hooted, a mournful, lonely sound. These were the familiar sounds of his isolated life, but tonight they seemed to carry an undercurrent of menace. He reached the side of the barn, pressing himself flat against the rough-weathered planks. The broken window was just above him. If he stretched, he might be able to peer inside. He found a loose rock, positioned it carefully, and slowly, cautiously, pulled himself up. The interior of the barn was mostly dark, but a sliver of moonlight from the broken pane, and perhaps a faint light from a lantern his father had, illuminated a small section near the center. He could see his father's broad back, and he could hear voices. Marcus's voice was low, slurred slightly, but laced with a cold anger that made Liam's blood run cold. "Should be grateful. Ungrateful little brat. Nobody else would bother with you. Nobody's even looking for you anymore, you hear me?" A soft sob answered him, a sound so filled with despair it twisted Liam's insides. It was the girl. "Eat it?" Marcus growled. There was the clatter of a plate being set down hard. "And no noise. You make a sound, and you'll regret it. You know I mean it." Another choked sob. Liam felt a surge of impotent rage, quickly followed by a sickening wave of fear. He wanted to burst in, to scream at his father, to help the girl. But he was just a boy. And his father was a monster. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He saw Marcus turn, his face in shadow, and move towards the spot where Liam had seen the makeshift bed. There was a rustling sound, then a sharp cry of pain from the girl, quickly stifled. Liam's stomach churned. He couldn't watch. He couldn't listen anymore. He scrambled down, his hands shaking, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He stumbled back from the barn, his mind reeling. Officer Reynolds, the kindly state trooper who'd visited their small school last spring, talking about safety, about what to do if you saw something wrong, if someone was in danger, if you see someone who needs help. Officer Reynolds had said, his voice calm and reassuring, "You tell a trusted adult, and if there's no trusted adult, or if they won't listen, you call 911. You might be the only one who can save them." A trusted adult. His mother was terrified. He was terrified. There was no one else. In that moment, standing in the cold moonlight, the horrifying sounds from the barn still echoing in his ears, Liam made a decision that would change everything. He turned and ran, not away from the barn, but back towards the silent sleeping house. He slipped through the back door, his heart pounding. The old rotary phone, a relic from another era, sat on the small table in the kitchen, its black plastic gleaming faintly in the darkness. With trembling fingers, Liam lifted the heavy receiver. The dial tone hummed in his ear, a mundane sound in a world that had suddenly become a nightmare. His hand shook so badly he could barely fit his finger into the holes of the dial. 911. A click, a brief ring, and then a calm, professional voice. 911? What is your emergency? Liam swallowed, his throat tight. He whispered, his voice hoarse, terrified. There's a girl in our barn. At the Gallagher farm, Ravens Hollow. My dad. I think he's hurting her. He keeps her locked up. He choked out the address, the name of the nearest crossroad, before his courage failed him. He slammed the receiver down, a wave of nausea washing over him. Heart-hammering, he scrambled back up the stairs, taking them two at a time, heedless of the noise. He dove into his bed, pulling the covers up to his chin, adrenaline coursing through his veins like wildfire. He'd done it. He'd actually done it. From his window, he watched the dark, silent barn. Minutes stretched into an eternity. What if they didn't come? What if they didn't believe him? What if his father found out? The fear was a living thing, coiling in his stomach. But beneath the fear, a tiny, fragile ember of certainty flickered. He couldn't have done anything else. The girl in the barn, her terrified eyes, her soft sobs, she needed help. And he, Liam Gallagher, a scared 10-year-old boy, was the only one who could give it to her. He didn't know how long he waited, suspended between terror and a desperate hope, before he saw his father emerge from the barn. Marcus moved quickly, secured the padlock with a decisive click, then headed back towards the house, his silhouette a dark promise of retribution. Liam squeezed his eyes shut, feigning sleep, his breath held tight in his chest as his father's heavy footsteps passed his bedroom door. The die was cast. He could only pray now. Pray that help would arrive before his father discovered the ultimate betrayal. The silence that descended upon the farmhouse after Marcus returned from the barn was heavier, more foreboding than ever. Liam lay rigid in his bed, every muscle tensed, listening to the muffled sounds from his parents' bedroom downstairs. His father's low, grumbling tones, his mother's softer, placating responses. Then, an uneasy quiet settled, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway and the frantic thumping of his own heart. He stared at the glowing green numbers of his digital alarm clock. 12:17 a.m. Each minute crawled by with agonizing slowness. Had he imagined the 911 call? Had his whispered plea for help been lost in the ether? The fear of his father discovering his betrayal was a cold knot in his stomach. Marcus would know. He would know someone had called, and in their isolated hollow there were precious few suspects. The image of the girl, Lily. He decided to call her in his mind, for her pale, fragile appearance kept flashing before his eyes. Her dirt-streaked face, the terror in her wide blue eyes, the way she'd flinched at his father's voice. No matter what happened to him, he couldn't have left her to that fate. He clung to that thought, a small raft in a sea of terror. At 12:38 a.m., just as a sliver of doubt began to creep into his resolve, it happened. A flash of blue and red light pulsed against his bedroom walls, painting the room in brief, rhythmic bursts of color. His heart leaped into his throat. He sat bolt upright in bed, his ears straining. The crunch of tires on the gravel driveway, a sound distinct from his father's rumbling pickup. A car door opened and closed with a solid, authoritative thud. Footsteps, firm and measured, approached the front porch. Then the knock. Sharp, decisive, echoing through the sleeping farmhouse. Liam held his breath. Downstairs he heard a muffled curse, the creak of bed springs as his father stirred. "Who in the goddamn hell is that at this hour?" Marcus's voice, rough with sleep and irritation, carried clearly up the stairs. His mother's softer tones followed, laced with anxiety. "Marcus, please, calm down, let me see who it is." Another knock, more insistent this time. Liam crept from his bed, his legs trembling. He tiptoed to his bedroom door and opened it a crack, peering into the darkened hallway. He could hear his father stomping down the stairs, muttering a stream of curses under his breath. The porch light flickered on, casting a pale yellow glow. The front door creaked open. A deep, calm voice, unfamiliar, cut through the night. "Deputy Miller, Culpeper County Sheriff's Department. Sorry to disturb you folks so late." "What's this about, Deputy?" Marcus's voice had changed. The anger was still there, but it was overlaid with a thin veneer of forced politeness, a tone Liam recognized as a precursor to a storm. The calm before the fury. "We received an anonymous call from this address, sir," Deputy Miller explained, his tone professional but carrying an undercurrent of caution. "Report of a person, possibly in distress. I need to follow up on that." "A call from here?" Marcus's voice rose in feigned disbelief. "That's ridiculous. My wife and son are both asleep upstairs. Nobody here made any call. Must be some kids playing a prank." Liam could hear his mother's lighter footsteps now as she joined his father at the door. "Is everything all right, officer?" Her voice was strained, fearful. "Ma'am," Deputy Miller responded, his voice steady. "As I was telling your husband, someone called 911 from this residence a short while ago. They reported a person in need of assistance. They specifically mentioned your barn." A beat of tense, suffocating silence. Liam could almost feel the atmosphere in the entryway crackle. He imagined his father's face, already dark, contorting further with rage, his mother's eyes widening with a new, more potent terror. "That's absurd," Marcus finally boomed, his voice laced with indignation. "There's nothing in our barn but old equipment and animal feed. Like I said, Deputy, someone's pulling your leg, wasting taxpayer money." Liam knew he should stay in his room, stay hidden, pretend he knew nothing. It was the safe thing to do, the thing his fear screamed at him to do. But as he stood there, listening to his father's confident lies, the image of Lily's terrified face flashed in his mind. Her matted hair, the hopeless despair in her eyes when his father had growled at her. If he stayed silent now, what would happen to her when the police left? What fresh hell would his father unleash upon her, and perhaps upon him and his mother, for this intrusion? A sudden, surprising clarity cut through his fear. This was it, his moment. He could cower under his blankets and pretend, as he had done for years whenever his father's temper flared. Or he could stand up. He could tell the truth, whatever the consequences. His hands trembled as he pushed back his blankets. His legs felt weak, like overcooked noodles, as he stood, but with each hesitant step towards his bedroom door, his resolve solidified. The girl in the barn, Lily, had no one else. His mother was too afraid. It had to be him. He couldn't hide. Not anymore. With his heart hammering against his ribs so hard it felt like it might break free, Liam pulled his bedroom door fully open. He walked to the top of the stairs, his small figure silhouetted against the dim light from the hallway. From his vantage point, he could see Deputy Miller standing in the open doorway, a tall, uniformed man, his face stern but not unkind, his hand resting casually near the holster on his belt. Marcus stood with his back to the stairs, his posture rigid with suppressed fury. Eleanor hovered to the side, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, as if for protection, her face a pale mask in the harsh glare of the porch light. Deputy Miller was the first to notice him. The officer's eyes flickered up to the landing, then back to Marcus. "Is that your son, Mr. Gallagher?" he asked, his voice even. Marcus whirled around, his eyes, when they found Liam, blazing with a mixture of betrayal and incandescent rage. The look made Liam's stomach twist into a painful knot, but he forced himself to remain still, to meet his father's furious gaze. He started down the stairs, each step a conscious act of defiance. "Did anyone in this household make a call to emergency services tonight?" Deputy Miller asked, his gaze now moving between the three family members, settling on Liam. Despite the crushing weight of his father's stare, despite the tremor in his own legs, Liam descended the last few steps. He stopped at the bottom, a small, determined figure in the tense standoff. He nodded, his voice small but surprisingly steady in the charged silence. "I did," he admitted. "I called. I heard someone crying. From inside the barn. There's a girl in there." The air in the small entryway crackled, thick with unspoken accusations and dawning horror. Marcus's face, already a mask of fury, darkened to a dangerous, purplish hue. He took a menacing step towards Liam, his hand shooting out to clamp onto the boy's shoulder, fingers digging in like talons. "He had a nightmare, Deputy," Marcus snarled, his voice a low, threatening rumble. He squeezed Liam's shoulder, hard enough to make him wince. "Kids his age, active imaginations, he sleepwalks sometimes. I'm truly sorry he troubled you with his fantasies." He attempted a placating yet strained smile at the officer. "I wasn't dreaming," Liam insisted, his voice gaining a surprising strength despite the painful grip on his shoulder. He tried to shrug away from his father's hold, but Marcus's fingers only tightened. "I saw her yesterday afternoon, and I heard her again tonight." Deputy Miller's expression remained neutral, a practiced mask of official calm, but Liam saw his posture shift, a subtle tensing that indicated heightened alertness. His gaze, sharp and assessing, moved from Marcus's tightening grip on Liam to the boy's pale but determined face. "Is that right, son?" he asked, looking directly at Liam, his voice even, inviting. "He's confused, I tell you," Marcus interjected, his voice rising, losing its forced composure. "There is no one in our barn. This is private property, Deputy. Unless you have a warrant, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. You're upsetting my family." Deputy Miller studied Marcus's face for a long, scrutinizing moment. His gaze then shifted to Eleanor, who stood frozen, a silent, terrified statue, her eyes darting frantically between her husband and her son. The officer was a man trained to observe, to read the subtle cues of human behavior. He noted the way Eleanor flinched almost imperceptibly when Marcus raised his voice. He saw the tremor in her hands as she clutched her thin housecoat tighter around herself. And as she unconsciously reached up to brush a stray strand of hair from her face, her sleeve rode up just enough to reveal a constellation of faint, purplish bruises encircling her delicate wrist, marks that looked disturbingly like finger imprints. The deputy's gaze lingered on those marks for a fraction of a second, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, before returning to Marcus's increasingly agitated face. "I understand your concern for privacy, Mr. Gallagher," Deputy Miller said, his voice still calm but now edged with a new firmness. "But when a minor makes a credible report of someone in distress, particularly a child, I have a legal duty to investigate. This isn't optional." "My son had a nightmare," Marcus insisted, his voice strained, a bead of sweat trickling down his temple. "He's prone to them. Aren't you, Liam?" He gave Liam's shoulder another punishing squeeze. "Tell the deputy, Sarah. He has nightmares, doesn't he?" Eleanor's eyes dropped to the worn linoleum floor. He has had bad dreams before," she mumbled, her voice barely a whisper, not directly confirming Frank's claim, but not denying it either. It was a masterpiece of fearful equivocation. Deputy Miller nodded thoughtfully. "I see. Well, Mr. Gallagher, here's the situation as it stands. I have a report that needs to be documented. Without confirming there's no one in that barn, I'll have to file this as an unresolved welfare check. And that, I'm afraid, would trigger a mandatory follow-up visit from Child Protective Services." The mention of CPS had a visible effect on Marcus. His face, if possible, grew even paler, his eyes widening with something that looked suspiciously like panic masquerading as outrage. "CPS? That's ridiculous. We're good parents. Tell him, Sarah." He shot a desperate, commanding glance at his wife. Eleanor nodded mechanically, her gaze still fixed on the floor. We try our best." "I'm sure you do," Deputy Miller said, his tone neutral, yet somehow carrying the weight of disbelief. "Which is why I'm offering you a simple solution. A quick 5-minute check of the barn would allow me to close this matter immediately. I can be on my way. No reports filed, no follow-ups necessary. Just to put the boy's mind at ease, if nothing else." Marcus's jaw worked, his eyes darting around the entryway as if seeking an escape route. The veneer of control was rapidly cracking. It's the middle of the night, Deputy," he protested weakly, grasping at straws. "The barn's locked up tight. I'd have to find the key. It could be anywhere." "I'm in no hurry," Deputy Miller replied, his calm demeanor a stark, unsettling contrast to Marcus's growing agitation. His gaze drifted casually around the entryway, his trained eye taking in details. He noted the pair of heavy work boots by the door, caked with fresh, reddish mud, the distinctive mud from the path leading to the barn. This, despite Marcus's earlier assertion that no one ever went near the place. "Those your work boots, Mr. Gallagher?" the deputy asked, his voice deceptively casual, nodding towards the muddy footwear. Marcus followed his gaze, his eyes narrowing. "Yeah, so what?" "Just noticing the mud. Looks pretty fresh. Been out to the barn recently, have you, despite it being so dangerous and all?" I checked on some equipment earlier this evening," Marcus said, a little too quickly. "Before it got dark. Like I said, there's nothing out there but old farm junk." His story was starting to unravel, the inconsistencies piling up. Deputy Miller nodded slowly, unconvinced. "Mr. Gallagher," he said, his voice losing its casual tone, becoming steelier. "I'm going to be straight with you. Your son, Liam, has made a very specific report about seeing a young girl in your barn." He's standing by that statement, despite your attempts to dissuade him. His gaze flickered meaningfully to Liam's shoulder, still trapped in Marcus's grip. I can see fresh mud tracks leading to and from that barn from where I'm standing. Your wife has bruises on her wrists that look like they were made by fingers. And you are extraordinarily resistant to a simple welfare check that would take all of 5 minutes and clear this whole thing up. Marcus's face contorted, his composure finally shattering. Are you accusing me of something, deputy? He snarled, his voice raw with fury and a dawning desperation. Not at all, Mr. Gallagher, Deputy Miller replied evenly, though his hand had drifted closer to his sidearm. I'm simply explaining why I cannot and will not leave this property without checking that barn. Now, we can do this the easy way, with your cooperation. Or I can call for backup, and we can wait for a supervising officer and potentially a warrant. Your choice. But understand this. One way or another, I will be looking in that barn tonight. Eleanor stood frozen, her eyes wide with a terror that seemed to paralyze her, darting between her enraged husband and the resolute deputy. Liam could see the internal struggle playing out on her face. Years of ingrained fear and obedience warring with a mother's instinct to protect her child, and perhaps a deeper hidden knowledge. Marcus's hands clenched into massive fists at his sides. This is harassment. I'll be filing a complaint. I'll have your badge for this. That's your right, sir, the deputy acknowledged calmly. But right now, I need to see inside that barn. He reached for the radio on his shoulder. Dispatch, this is Miller. Unit 304. I'm at the Gallagher residence, Ravens Hollow, potential situation. Requesting backup. As the deputy began to speak into his radio, something in Marcus seemed to snap. A dangerous, predatory calm settled over him, his eyes glittering with a desperate, cornered animal's cunning. A made his decision. Fine, he spat, cutting off the deputy's transmission with a wave of his hand. Fine, let's go look in your damned barn, you'll see. There's nothing there but my son's overactive imagination and a broken window. He released Liam's shoulder with a shove. Deputy Miller finished his radio call, his eyes never leaving Marcus. Backup is en route, ETA, 10 minutes. Standard procedure. He then gestured towards the door with a nod. After you, Mr. Gallagher. Marcus snatched a heavy-duty flashlight from a drawer in the kitchen, its beam cutting a swath through the dim entryway as he stomped towards the front door, radiating an aura of barely suppressed violence. Deputy Miller followed, maintaining a careful, professional distance, his senses on high alert. Liam moved to join them, a knot of dread and anticipation tightening in his stomach. But Eleanor's hand shot out, her fingers like ice, gripping his arm. Liam, no! Stay here with me, she whispered, her voice trembling, her eyes wide with a terror that was almost paralyzing. But Mom, I need to show them where she is, Liam insisted, trying to pull away. Deputy Miller, overhearing the hushed exchange, paused at the doorway. The boy should come, he said, his voice firm but not unkind. He can show me exactly where he believes he saw someone. It might save us some time. Eleanor reluctantly released her grip, her face a mask of anguish. Liam hurried to catch up with the deputy, consciously staying closer to the uniformed officer than to his father. As they crossed the moonlit yard towards the hulking silhouette of the barn, Deputy Miller kept one hand near his holstered weapon, his gaze never wavering from Marcus's broad, resentful back. The only sounds were their footsteps crunching on the gravel path, the distant chirp of crickets, and the heavy, labored breathing of Marcus Gallagher. They reached the massive barn doors. Marcus fumbled with the heavy padlock, his movements deliberately slow, exaggerated. See? He grumbled, rattling the lock. Locked up tight. Just like I said, no one could get in or out. Open it, please, Mr. Gallagher, Deputy Miller instructed, his patience clearly wearing thin. The backup units would be arriving soon, and he wanted this resolved. Marcus continued to stall, pretending to struggle with the key. Damn thing's always sticking. Old lock, you know. He grunted, making a show of exerting effort. Deputy Miller watched Marcus's delaying tactics with growing suspicion. The man was cornered, and his behavior was becoming increasingly erratic. Mr. Gallagher, I need you to open that lock. Now. His voice was quiet, but it carried the unmistakable weight of authority. As Marcus finally inserted the key into the padlock, his demeanor suddenly shifted. He straightened up, a defiant, almost wild look in his eyes. You know what? I've had enough of this. This is my property. I do not consent to this search." He pulled the key out and turned to face the deputy, his chest puffed out. "Get a warrant if you want to look inside my barn, officer." Deputy Miller didn't flinch. "Mr. Gallagher," he stated, his voice hardening, "based on the credible report from your son, the physical evidence I've observed here tonight, including your wife's injuries, and your own misleading statements, and your increasingly obstructive behavior, I have reasonable suspicion to believe a person may be in imminent danger within that structure. I don't need a warrant for a welfare check under these exigent circumstances." He reached for his radio again. "Dispatch Miller. Subject is becoming uncooperative. Expedite backup." Marcus's face twisted with a potent cocktail of rage, and something else Liam recognized with a sickening lurch. Raw, unadulterated fear. In a sudden, desperate movement that caught both Liam and the deputy by surprise, Marcus lunged, not at the deputy, but towards the barn door, as if to barricade it, to prevent entry at all costs. Deputy Miller reacted with the lightning speed and precision of his training. He sidestepped Marcus's clumsy rush, grabbed his outstretched arm, and used the man's own momentum to spin him around. In one fluid, practiced motion, he had Marcus face down on the gravel, his knee planted firmly in the middle of the larger man's back as he expertly pulled handcuffs from his belt. "Marcus Gallagher, you are interfering with a police investigation," the deputy grunted, his voice calm despite the brief, intense struggle. "Stay down and put your hands behind your back." Marcus roared, a sound of pure, animalistic fury, thrashing against the deputy's hold, cursing and threatening lawsuits, his face pressed into the dirt. And in that chaotic moment, as her husband was subdued on the ground, something within Eleanor Gallagher finally snapped. She had followed them out to the barn, a silent, wraith-like figure hovering in the shadows of the old oak tree at the edge of the yard, watching the confrontation unfold, with a mixture of terror and a dawning, desperate hope. Now seeing Marcus, her tormentor, the source of her years of fear, pinned and powerless, a lifetime of fear seemed to give way to a fragile, nascent resolve. She stepped forward into the pool of moonlight, her face pale but set with a new, astonishing determination. Ignoring Marcus's bellowed threats and strangled curses, she knelt beside her prone husband. Her trembling hand slipped into his trouser pocket. Her fingers, clumsy with haste and fear, closed around a small, cold piece of metal. She pulled out a single, tarnished key and held it out to Deputy Miller, her hand shaking so violently she almost dropped it. This is the key to the padlock," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying clearly in the sudden, shocked silence that had fallen, broken only by Marcus's muffled profanities. There is someone in there. A girl. Frank, Marcus. He brought her home. 3 years ago." Marcus's head snapped up, his face contorted with a murderous rage. "Shut your mouth, Sarah! Don't you dare say another word, you treacherous!" "Enough." Deputy Miller cut him off sharply, cinching the handcuffs tight around Marcus's thick wrists. He looked at Eleanor, his expression grim. "Ma'am, are you telling me there is in fact someone being held in this barn against their will?" Eleanor nodded, tears finally breaking free, streaming down her pale cheeks, washing away streaks of dirt and years of silent suffering. I wanted to help her," she choked out, her voice thick with unshed grief and guilt. "But he said he'd kill us both." "Kill Liam, if I ever told anyone. He said no one would believe me anyway. He said he'd hurt her worse." Marcus continued to yell threats, his voice hoarse, but his words were cut short as Deputy Miller hauled him to his feet and, with surprising strength, guided him towards a sturdy fence post, temporarily securing him there with a second pair of cuffs from his belt as the wail of approaching sirens grew louder. "Dispatch, this is Deputy Miller." He spoke urgently into his radio, his eyes never leaving the barn door. "Confirming possible kidnapping situation with a juvenile victim. Suspect is in custody, but scene is not yet secure. Requesting ambulance on standby, code 3. And notify Detective Ramirez." The radio crackled with confirmation. As the first set of flashing blue and red lights appeared at the end of their long driveway, Sarah, Eleanor, handed the key to Deputy Miller. Her hand trembled so badly she nearly dropped it. Liam moved to his mother's side, slipping his small, cold hand into hers. She squeezed it tightly, as if drawing strength from his quiet courage. Within minutes, the quiet isolation of Ravens Hollow was shattered. 2 additional patrol cars crunched up the gravel driveway, their lights painting the farmhouse and yard in strobing blues and reds, sirens silenced as they approached the scene. Uniformed officers quickly took charge of a still ranting Marcus, their movements efficient and professional, while Deputy Miller, key in hand, turned his attention to the barn. "Stay here with Officer Sanchez," Deputy Miller instructed Eleanor and Liam, nodding towards a female officer who had positioned herself beside them, her expression compassionate but firm. Liam watched, his mother's arm now a comforting weight around his shoulders, as Deputy Miller and another officer approached the massive barn door. The key slid into the old padlock. A click, a metallic groan, and the lock sprang open. The heavy door creaked inward, revealing the yawning blackness within. Flashlight beams sliced through the darkness, sweeping methodically across the dusty interior. Time seemed to stretch, to warp. The silence was broken only by Marcus's muffled, furious protests from where he was being secured in the back of a patrol car, and the faint, almost imperceptible whimper that seemed to emanate from the depths of the barn. Liam felt his mother's arm tighten around his shoulders, her body trembling slightly against his. He held his breath, his own heart a frantic drum. After what felt like an eternity, Deputy Miller emerged from the barn, his face grim, his usually calm demeanor visibly shaken. He spoke into his radio, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "Dispatch, this is Miller. We need that ambulance here, now. We have a juvenile female, approximate age 6 to 7, appears severely malnourished and dehydrated. Signs of long-term confinement." He approached Eleanor and Liam, his expression grave. "Ma'am," he said gently, "we found a young girl. She matches the description of Lillian Carter. She went missing from the Culpeper County Fair 3 years ago. Can you confirm? How long has she been here?" Eleanor broke down at his words, a raw, keening sob tearing from her throat. Her legs seemed to give way, and she sank towards the ground, Officer Sanchez moving quickly to support her. I've known about Lily for nearly 2 years." She gasped out between sobs, the confession tumbling out in a torrent of grief and guilt. "I found her. Marcus was away, at a livestock auction. She was so thin, so scared. Her voice cracked with emotion. I started sneaking food to her when I could, clean clothes sometimes. He threatened to kill both me and Liam if I ever told anyone. He said he'd hurt Lily worse, make her disappear for good, if I tried to help her escape." Deputy Miller knelt beside her, his voice gentle but firm. "Mrs. Gallagher, did you ever try to get help before tonight?" Eleanor nodded, wiping tears from her face with a trembling hand. "Once, a year ago, I called the sheriff's office anonymously, from a payphone in town. But Marcus, he found out somehow. He hurt me badly that night." Her eyes darted to her son, then quickly away, a fresh wave of shame washing over her. "He said next time it would be Liam who paid." I was too afraid after that. So afraid. Liam listened in stunned, horrified silence. The full, monstrous reality of what had been happening in his own home, under his very nose for years, was finally crashing down upon him. His father hadn't just been strict or mean-tempered. He'd been a monster, hiding in plain sight, capable of unimaginable cruelty. "You're both safe now," Deputy Miller assured them, his voice firm. "He can't hurt any of you anymore." Paramedics arrived, their movements swift and purposeful as they entered the barn with a gurney. Minutes later, they emerged, carrying Lily. She was swaddled in clean blankets, her small face pale and wan against the white fabric. Liam caught a glimpse of her as they loaded her into the ambulance. Despite her obvious weakness, her eyes, those wide, pale blue eyes, found his for a fleeting second. They were still filled with fear, but now, perhaps, a tiny, fragile flicker of something else. Confusion, and maybe, just maybe, a sliver of gratitude. Then the ambulance doors closed, sealing her inside, and with a brief siren wail, it sped away down the long driveway, carrying Lily towards help, towards hope. The farm had transformed into a sprawling crime scene. Police vehicles, their lights still flashing, cast an eerie, pulsating glow over the yard. Marcus had been taken away, his angry shouts finally silenced by the closed windows of the patrol car. Officers moved purposefully around the property, some taking photographs of the barn, others beginning a methodical search of the house with Eleanor's numb, dazed permission. A female detective, Ramirez, with kind eyes but a no-nonsense demeanor, arrived and gently guided Eleanor and Liam into the kitchen. The familiar room, with its scent of old wood and lingering spices, now felt alien, a stage for a drama too terrible to comprehend. Notebooks and recording devices appeared on the worn Formica tabletop as their statements were taken. As dawn began to break, painting the eastern sky in hues of soft pink and pale gold, more information about Lily Ann Carter came to light. She had indeed vanished from the county fair 3 years prior, a case that had haunted the small community, her smiling face on missing posters that had long since faded on telephone poles and in store windows. Her parents had never given up hope. From what we can tell, Detective Ramirez explained, her voice somber, it appears Mr. Gallagher found Lily wandering lost after she became separated from her parents at the fair. Instead of returning her, or calling us, he brought her here, and he kept her locked in that barn. The detective's face hardened. He subjected her to unimaginable abuse while an entire community, her parents most of all, searched and prayed for her safe return. A victim advocate, a kind-faced woman with a gentle voice, arrived and sat with Eleanor, explaining the resources available, the counseling, the support groups, the possibility of emergency housing. There's a lot to process, for both of you, she said softly, placing a comforting hand on Eleanor's arm. But you don't have to go through this alone. Liam's statement took over an hour. He recounted everything, from kicking the ball, to finding Lily, to his father's sinister visits to the barn, to the terrifying decision to call 911. The officers praised his courage, his bravery, but their words felt hollow against the enormity of what had happened, the darkness that had lived alongside them for so long. Later that morning, news arrived that Lily had been stabilized at the hospital. She was severely malnourished and traumatized, showing clear signs of long-term neglect and confinement, but the doctors were optimistic about her physical recovery. Her parents had been notified and were rushing to the hospital for a reunion 3 years in the making, a miracle they had almost lost hope for. Will she be okay? Liam asked Deputy Miller, who had stayed behind after most of the other officers had departed. The deputy was standing on the porch, looking out at the barn, now cordoned off with yellow crime scene tape that fluttered eerily in the morning breeze. Deputy Miller crouched down to Liam's eye level, his face solemn but kind. Physically, son, with good care, she'll recover. The emotional healing, that will take a lot longer. But she's young, and she has a loving family who never stopped looking for her. That's a very good foundation. He paused, then placed a hand on Liam's shoulder, his grip gentle this time. Liam, I want you to know something. What you did last night, making that call, that took tremendous courage. More courage than many adults possess. Because of you, Lily Ann Carter is going home to her family. You're a hero, son. Never forget that. Eleanor joined them on the porch, her eyes red-rimmed but clearer than Liam had seen them in years, as if a heavy fog had finally lifted. She pulled Liam into a tight embrace, her tears dampening his hair. You showed more courage than I ever could, my brave boy, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. I'm so sorry. I failed you. I failed her. You were scared too, Mom, Liam said, his voice muffled against her shoulder, an understanding dawning in him that was far beyond his years. He scared all of us. Deputy Miller stood, giving them a moment. Mrs. Gallagher, he said after a while, we'll need both of you to come down to the station later today to formalize your statements. The district attorney will want to speak with you as well. Eleanor nodded, her arm still wrapped tightly around Liam's shoulders. We'll be there, she said, a new strength in her voice. Whatever it takes to make sure he never, ever hurts anyone again. As the deputy's car finally disappeared down the long driveway, Eleanor and Liam remained on the porch, watching the sun climb higher in the sky. The barn stood in the distance, a silent, grim reminder of the darkness that had lived alongside them, hidden in plain sight for far too long. What happens now, Mom? Liam asked, voicing the unspoken question that hung heavy in the cool morning air. Eleanor took a deep breath, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Liam saw her stand a little taller, her shoulders a little less bowed. Now, my love, she said, her voice infused with a fragile, tentative hope. "Now we heal. Together. And we make sure Lily gets to do the same." The nightmare was over. The long, difficult journey towards a new dawn, a fragile hope, had just begun. And it had all started with a misplaced kick and the courage of a 10-year-old boy who dared to listen to the whispers in the timbers, and then to the whispers of his own heart.